The challenge for teachers with Key Stage 1 assessment is to design activities that will yield evidence about the extent of each child's abilities. So, how do whole class activities help? How do you achieve a balance between assessing and teaching? What resources do you give children so they can work at the extent of their abilities? And how do you keep an open mind about the outcome of activities? Val Worcester's analysing how well the activities we've seen in Programme 1 will build into a picture of evidence for children in Year 2 at Aston Tower.
You planned some brilliant activities, really enthusiastic ones. The children were really motivated to join in, particularly this shapes one. It was lovely, gave you opportunities to assess them really well. What about managing the whole class?
I find it's easier if you focus on a few children. So previous to doing the activity, I know the children that can do it, and I've got an idea of the ones that can't, but there might be a few that I'm not sure of, so I'm really focusing on those children.
And do you make some notes about those children while you're going along?
I find sometimes it takes too much time if I do it as I'm going along. If something surprises me, I might just jot down the child's name, and then later on I'll write some notes.
Yeah.
Who can think of a question to try and find out which shape I'm thinking of? Put your hand up if you've got a question. I'm not going to tell you which shape it is unless you can think of a question.
I think the point about vocabulary is really important because that's what I was listening for. So here I'm looking to see if they're actually describing the properties of the shape, not just giving me the name of the shape, just to see how much they understand.
The fans you made were lovely. A good way of having something to hold. And
it just makes sure that they're all involved so that they can all take part, and at a glance I can just see if there are lots that have got it or haven't got it.
Yeah, I like the way they hide it behind their back.
Yeah, it just makes sure that you haven't got any that are dominating by shouting out the answer.
Rectangle has two sides right and the other right, but it must be a square.
This is an interesting incident where you're debating the square, rectangle, oblong issue.
I think a lot of them can recognise a square or recognise a rectangle, but I was trying to get the actual details of why it's a rectangle or why it's a square.
Yeah.
And I was trying to draw out the word length, but they were finding that quite difficult.
Yes, it is hard. Getting that accurate vocabulary, and that's the way you can tell whether they've got the concepts, the ideas.
Yes.
And the discussion that you're having about the circle took that a little further.
Yes, this was interesting. Abdullah, he said that a circle had no sides, so it was quite interesting to find out what he thought about the properties.
It's useful to be able to address misconceptions, isn't it, like that?
Yeah, and sometimes things they don't understand, actually for assessment purposes, is quite useful. It tells you what they don't know as well as what they do.
It's just as important to listen to.
Most definitely, yes.
Fantastic. I knew what you meant, but Eddie didn't know what you meant. What is it?
Using the puppet is a lovely idea.
Yeah, they really like the puppet and they're used to me using it, and I think it just it's a familiar thing for them and sets them at ease a bit.
It is really important that when you're doing assessment of this kind that you don't do anything different or out of the ordinary, because children pick up on that very quickly, and it's really good to try and keep everything as familiar as possible.
Yeah. They don't even realise they're being assessed, so to them it's just what we normally do, it's nothing new.
And you're going to get the best from them.
That's when you get the best information, the best data from actually observing them.
Definitely.
I've seen that often where children get tense when it's an assessment or a test of some kind, and they're not as relaxed as we'd like them to be.
Can you remember, children, we've read this story before, haven't we? And inside there were lots of pets for sale, weren't there?
Using a story as a starter for a maths activity is a great idea.
Yeah, I decided to use the story because it was something that they really loved. They really enjoyed the story. And again, it's using something that's familiar and something that enthuses them.
What we're going to do is we're going to work in pairs. Okay, we're going to work as a team. So you've got to take it in turns to pay for the pet.
Real money is what they use in everyday life, and very different from the plastic, which is rather arbitrary kind of a approach to it. So yes, I like that very much.
What I was trying to do is encourage lots of discussion, because observing and listening to the children's discussion about maths tells you what they're actually thinking and what processes are going through their mind. Often if it's something written, and there's just a written answer, you don't know how they've arrived at that answer.
No.
And as well with some of our children, because English is their second language, I think this is illustrating what they do know, whereas if they were writing it down or having to read a question, they would really struggle with that.
Yes, and sometimes what they record is only part of the picture.
Yeah.
80, 90, 20.
Sometimes it's difficult, like here, where one child is particularly dominant and it's quite tricky.
Yeah, I found that one child was, two children there were dominating. But after a while, I'd learnt all I needed to learn about their learning, and it was time actually to focus on the other children. So I had to gently ask them to step back.
Yeah,
and
when to intervene is
can
quite,
be quite difficult. Yes.
I think that's one of the most difficult things about assessment. You do have to just sit back and listen to them and find out. And it's so difficult as a teacher not to try and teach them.
You have to move, I think, between the teaching role and the assessor role right through an activity, so that you're sometimes intervening and teaching and sometimes listening and watching to see what they know.
With the pairs though, I mean, it sometimes is useful to have one who's a bit more dominant to spark them off, because if you are sitting back, you need someone to start the conversation and start the discussion.
Yes, 4 very quiet children might not be the best choice. So the pairings, the groupings are quite crucial.
Yeah. Okay, Ijla, can you count up the money for me? Move the coins and count.
This is interesting, where he's starting with the biggest coin and then moving along.
Yes, that's quite a mathematical milestone to know that you start with the largest and count on from that. So those kinds of highlights may be the kinds of things to note down and record and to keep in your memory, or to make a little note. It's hard to work with a small group and focus on them without the others interrupting you.
Well, obviously it's not something that we do every day, but when we are doing something for assessment purposes, I often find it very good to organise independent activities for the rest of the class. And again, I'm lucky enough to have a classroom assistant who will work with the other children. And if they do need help, they're quite used to using things in the classroom to help them.
Yeah, so they know
resources. They know where the resources are and they can go and help themselves.
This beanbag game meant that they didn't know that they were being assessed.
Yeah, they really enjoyed it, and to them it was just a bit of fun. They probably didn't realise they were doing any maths, really.
No, it's great. And you prepared it well. You thought carefully about the numbers you chose, and you could change the numbers according to the needs of different groups of children.
Yes, yeah.
So that's a really adaptable game.
Okay, if there's anything in the classroom that you need to help you.
Didn't put out the whiteboards.
No, I deliberately didn't put anything out because I wanted to find out what they could actually do, and I thought some of them might be able to work it out mentally, but then they know where resources are, so if they needed to do some working out, they knew they could get the whiteboard.
Yes.
Or here one child goes to get 100 square because he needs a bit of extra help.
Yes, and that's another thing to assess, is their ability to choose the appropriate resources without being prompted by the teacher.
What about Caitlin? Caitlin's done something interesting here. What did you do to the number 26?
I partitioned it.
You partitioned it well.
And here as well, I wanted to know a bit more about how she'd worked it out.
It was really interesting there that she actually used the word partitioning. Was that what you were looking for?
Yeah, I was looking to see if she could actually do it and explain it to me as well.
So asking them to explain their thinking is another way of finding out what they know. So after you finished a game like that, how would you remember what had happened and who did what?
Well, I might make some just informal jottings, and then when I come back to sort of more formal assessment, I've got those sort of notes there. And when I am sort of making a judgment about what level they're at, I can use those notes that I've made to help me make that decision.
Yeah, so you've got some evidence for those judgments. And what they've put on the whiteboard is only part of the story.
Yeah, I do sometimes photocopy the whiteboards if they've done something that really illustrates their understanding, then they're quite easy to photocopy.
Well, quite often we'll just make a quick note on our planning for that week, and we'll note it down. And when
informally?
It's very informal, yeah. Also, another thing that we do is we have individual benchmark sheets for each child. So we'd often, if something is, that we've noted that they've achieved something, we'll just highlight it on there, and that's just a tick.
So something significant would be recorded on an individual basis?
Yes.
I love the green water in the capacity activity, but it was well linked to a real need, a mathematical need for the juice for a party.
And it's always best with these sorts of activities, when you can, to make it as real as possible and give them a real problem to solve if you can.
The errors that they make and the difficulties they have can tell you an awful lot about what they know.
You don't need to get 30 cups, but you can fill this up how many times? 30 times, okay.
This is fascinating. She needs 30 cups laid out to find out how many bottles are required.
Yeah, so that obviously is telling me that she's at a different level of understanding than the other children, I think.
Maybe needs more practice with these kinds of activities.
Most definitely, you can see that.
Accuracy is sometimes a difficulty here. We never fill a cup to the brim with juice. We'd never do that.
This was something I was hoping to get from the children. I was hoping the children would come up with the fact that we need... You wouldn't actually fill a cup to the top, and also about uniformity, that we need to use the same amount each time when we're measuring.
Yes, to make it fair when they drank the orange juice.
Yes, yeah.
There's 9 in here. How many of these do we need then to fit so that the whole class can have a drink? There's 30 children in the class.
Get another bottle like that.
We need another bottle like this. Well done, Aklima.
I think it's important as well, the activity was quite kind of open because Aklima obviously knows a bit more and she was able to demonstrate that to you. You didn't kind of hold her back. And
No, because it's one thing about these sorts of activities, you've got to be quite adaptable, and often opportunities arise for different sorts of assessment. For me to learn anything about Aklima, I had to take it up to a higher level, really.
Yes. And you moved the 2 girls to the whiteboards to help them to discuss that.
Yes, yeah. Aklima obviously needed a lot of prompting there to actually share what she actually knew and understood. I thought I could get a lot more out of her, so I pursued it.
So keeping an open mind is vital when you're doing practical activities, to see where the activity might take you or take the children.
I think as well that the really important thing is that the children were having fun, so they weren't worrying about, do I know the right answer, am I going to get it right or wrong? And
so more relaxed.
They were relaxed. It was things that were familiar to them, and they were having a good time.
It's been great to be part of the activities and to watch. I've learnt an awful lot about the children and about assessment, about teaching and learning. So thank you for letting me share that with you.
So, here are Val's top tips.
Val's been really helpful. She's given us a lot of advice, and there's been things that I didn't realise I was assessing, and Val's pointed out that I have been assessing all the time.
We do these things on a day-to-day basis, and you don't realise perhaps how significant the assessments that we do are.